I'm based in, my name is Jon, or John, if that's easier, based in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's 10 a.m. here. So while you're ending off your day, I'm just starting mine. But let me just go ahead and share my screen. We'll get some content on there. Um, Full disclaimer, my 3-month-old daughter is in the room next door. If you hear a little bit of noise in the background, that's probably her. But I'm sure the microphone should be able to single out my voice. But thanks for having me on the user group. This is the debut of this session, so if there are some small mishaps with the demo, you'll know why. We'll pray to the demo gods that everything will run smoothly, because full disclosure, I plan on this to be a quite demo-heavy session and not a lot of slides. I do have a few slides just to help with the talking points and for you guys to have your eyes on something in between demos, but it will be a very demo heavy session. And as Gilbert said, please write questions in the chat, and there will be times where we'll dive into any questions you might have put in there. So the topic for today: native write-back for Fabric and Power BI with Translytical Task Flows. And just to give you a quick background to me and why I think this topic is extremely interesting. I'm working for a Danish-based data consultancy, Inspire, and I don't want to call it claim to fame, but my claim to working with Power BI and Fabric is very much the integrations between Power BI, Fabric, and the Power Platform. Originally, I've been building tons and tons of Power BI extensions or Fabric integrations with the Power Platform. So, using Power Apps to perform write-back actions in Power BI, using Power Automate to automate sending out emails or approval flows from within Power BI reports, that sort of thing. And just to give you the quick fly-in to Translytical Task Flows, why are they so exciting and especially exciting to me, is that by and large, they make the Power Platform integrations that I've been building obsolete to some extent, and not like that's going to put me out of a job. I sincerely welcome this change. I think it's awesome that we get native Fabric support for some of these extensibilities, extensions for Fabric and Power BI that we would otherwise require either licensing entire third-party solutions for, or building Power Platform and introducing the Power Platform to our solution architecture. So just to sort of show you the agenda for today and my promise for you guys today, we'll have a brief introduction into what is Translytical Task Flows, what are the components that they consist of, because Translytical Task Flows is not like one Fabric item. It's a bunch of functionality bundled together. We'll go straight into showing what it looks like, what does an actual solution look like, and then you'll get the sort of level 200 introduction end-to-end. How do I build that solution, starting with the SQL database, going over the Power BI report, and finally creating the user data function that actually does the magic. We'll do a small comparison of functionality and limitations compared to Power Apps. And then the floor is just open throughout the agenda, but also at the end for questions. So my hope for today is that you leave with a pretty comprehensive understanding of what are Translytical Task Flows, what can you use them for, and hopefully you have a pretty good idea how to get started building them with the building blocks and the sort of flow that I'm presenting to you today. So that's the plan for the next between 45 60 minutes. We'll see. As mentioned, it's the first time I'm doing this session. So what are Translytical Task Flows? I kind of took the surprise out of it by listing the components on the agenda there. But in essence, Translytical Task Flows are a way to describe the process of interacting with backend artifacts or artifacts outside of your Power BI report from within Power BI report through the use of user data functions. The case I have brought for you today is a write-back scenario in which we'll build a Power BI report and semantic model on top of a Fabric backend item, and we will use Translytical Task Flows to write data back to that original source and display it live in our Power BI report. I think that's the most common extension flow that I've seen for Power BI reporting scenarios. I've built literally hundreds of these write-back solutions with Power Apps in the past. And that's why you, in this case, will create a comment solution, because that's a very simple way of handling both the notion of, well, creating new rows in our backend, updating rows in our backend, and also deleting rows in our backend. But that is only one possible solution. I could have done this session focusing on some of the other use cases. I have a link to some great examples that I'll share with you guys as well. But just to sort of pique your interest here, some of the flows that we see made possible through this functionality is stuff like calling and calling an AI GPT model somewhere and provide input back to the calling user from Power BI. So something like selecting an item in your Power BI report, triggering your task flow to get context information from an API or from a GPT model. That stuff's possible using Translytical Task Flows. It could also be kicking off an approval flow, so sending Teams messages or Teams approvals and initiating them from inside a Power BI report, and then whenever the response is generated in Teams, feeding the response back into Power BI. Those are also potential use cases. But today, the focus is on the write-back aspect and doing that natively in Power BI, as also advertised by the session title and description. Why should you do it this way instead of using a Power Platform solution or a third-party app? I think there are three core reasons here. The fact that it's native to Fabric means that you will not have to worry about external licensing costs. So you don't need to worry about licensing all of your Power BI users with Power Platform, Power Apps premium licenses as well, just for the sake of having a comment integrated into your Power BI reports. You pay for all you see today through your Fabric capacity. Secondarily, I think it's a much simpler solution architecture to be able to abstract away whatever infrastructure is on, for example, the Power Platform side of things, not having to worry about Dataverse and the Power Platform environments and the security roles in that space. We just need to focus on what's in Fabric. And that's, of course, very appealing to a solution architect. And thirdly, I think there's actually an argument to be made that you can be even more creative and crazy with your extensions when using UDFs, because the user data functions, because it's all just Python. Can you do it with Python? You can likely do it in a user data function and pass whatever results back to Power BI or to your backend, which is more than we can say about Power Apps being a low-code framework. It's a little more difficult to create code extensions. We can do it with custom connectors and custom components, but it's a little, the whole AI integration thing I was just mentioning before as a possibility is definitely easier to get started with in Translytical Task Flows than in alternative solutions. So that was just a couple of pointers as to why you should consider using this. At the end of the session, and when we've had the demos, I also have some considerations and limitations that might make you want to reconsider whether they are the correct solution, but more about that later. I think it's time to jump into it, right? Let's see the giraffe. I don't know if we have that saying in English. That's a very Danish expression. Apologies for that. But let's go ahead and just see what it looks like. So let me just refresh the page here. I have a Power BI report here, which is very simple. It's built on the AdventureWorks data set that I think many of you have come to experience see before. Let's see if my capacity wants to warm up here. The underlying semantic model is just querying a SQL DB in Fabric, and I have the AdventureWorks data sets showing units sold by product category and product name. And that's the only visualization really I have on the page here, right? Then I have on the right-hand side, that's where all the magic happens for this simple demo. On the right-hand side, there's a little bit of instructions for the user, just me putting in some text labels, and then there are a couple of slicers and some buttons. And this is what's actually running the entire Translytical Task Flow from the Power BI side of things. So what I'm able to do here is I'm able to pick a product in my visual on the left. I'm gonna be able to say, do I want to comment on the product itself or on its parent product category? I'll need to select that. And depending on which of these levels of detail I'm selecting, I'm allowed to assign it a score. So in this case, let me just comment on the product, say, well, we are performing pretty well. I can put in a comment here that says, this product is selling pretty well. And if I click the save button, the first time when I load a report and kick off this translytical task flow, it'll just take a second to kick off. We'll see in a second. I'll get a little box saying success, hopefully, and the comment should appear in my table down here below. And it did. The action was completed successfully. If I click details, request submitted, a new comment was successfully added. I can see what function was kicked off, but more about that later. And more importantly, the data that I just created through these input options and triggering a function with this button, the data is live integrated back into my semantic model. This is a Power BI table, right? But I could have integrated this data in my visualizations or in a tooltip up here, or I could have, instead of adding a comment, I could have been editing the master data here or something like that, right? I'm interfacing the backend directly with this translytical task flow. I can also go ahead and actually update this. This product is selling okay. Let's try one more time. Now you saw it was way faster and the data is already updated. There is something about, the user data function needs to find or start up a session in the backend and needs to be running for this to trigger. So users doing repetitive actions will see better performance. But once it's going, it's pretty fast, right? And I can go ahead and say, okay, I actually also want to comment on its main category and saying touring bikes are our best sellers. We just sent that off, and you'll notice that an additional comment will pop up. Same product ID, different level of detail, 2 different comments, 2 different results. The reason I'm showing this, that you can sort of comment on multiple levels of detail, is because I think a very common comment scenario, annotation scenario, especially in financial reporting, if you want to integrate comments on your P&L or comments on your cash flow statements, I've so often come across the business requirement that people want to be able to add comments on a daily level and a monthly level and maybe even on a yearly level, all from within the same interface. And now here I'm obviously not using a time dimension, but I'm using different levels of detail. It's the same concept. And I'm just showing you here that you are able to do these writebacks on multiple levels of detail, multiple granularities from within the same interface, basically at the same time. Of course, I'm leaving a little bit up to the user here. They have to make the correct selection, but there is possibilities within UDFs to define validation of inputs if you want to make sure that users are not choosing a weird combination of items here. Anyway, this report, this solution is what we're going to be trying to build together today, and what we'll be going through. So the next picture here, let's create it from scratch. And cooking show magic may occur, especially depending a little on how quickly we progress throughout the session. But let's try and give it a go. Before we actually build the flow, just a few pointers on how do you actually enable this, because full disclosure, everything you're seeing today is in preview, like everything. The components of the task flow itself leverages user data functions to do the actual operation that interfaces the backend, and that's in preview, and is a feature that you'll need to check in your admin settings in Fabric. You also need to enable SQL database in Fabric. Technically, you can do this, what I'm showing today, with warehouses. I have a slide in a second about choosing a backend. But if you want to do the exact same thing I'm doing today, you'll need to enable the preview for SQL databases in Fabric. And then in addition, there's no less than 5 different Power BI desktop preview features you need to enable. The translytical task flows themselves, 3 different types of slicers. The new slicers, they are the only ones that work with these task flows. And then again, if you're using a Fabric SQL database, there's also a 5th requirement to enable the connecting to Fabric SQL databases. So full disclosure, this is all in preview, but nonetheless pretty exciting to play around with. All right, back to that storage artifact discussion that I briefly hinted at. So when you interface your backend in Fabric from Translytical Task Flows or from user data functions specifically, as of yesterday, there were 3 options that you could connect to. You could connect to Fabric, SQL databases, to warehouses, and to lakehouses. I just learned this morning that they added support for mirror databases. But lakehouses and mirror databases, they actually, mirror databases are read-only. You cannot write back to those. So for write back, you're limited to those 3. Lakehouses only allow you to write to the files part of the lakehouse and not to a table, because the SQL Analytics endpoint is read-only. Warehouses, they allow writing to your tables directly, but there are currently some T-SQL limitations. For example, lack of identity columns that you'll have to work around to accommodate creating a primary key or something of the sort, depending on your scenarios. Rumor has it that I think it's on the roadmap actually to that there is T-SQL support coming for identity columns and warehouses sometime in the fall, I believe. But anyway, the gist of it all is that right now your best option for full sort of transactional command power T-SQL support, SQL DBs and Fabric, optimized for the scenario, and is Microsoft's recommendation. But I wanted to include this slide to let you know that it is possible to write back to warehouses. It's also possible to write back to lakehouses, but you'll need some kind of job turning those files into tables for your report to consume afterwards, and it will not be a very live experience for your end users. A little bit more about storage modes and the direct query versus direct lake and import will be coming when we get to the Power BI side of things. I'll start out just by spinning up a SQL DB in Fabric for us to use, and then we'll take a bit of a breather afterwards to see if there are any questions so far. But let me just get started spinning this up, as the actual loading the demo data sometimes takes a second. So I have, just a Fabric-enabled workspace here. I have a folder for Translytical Task Flows, and yes, I butcher the name all the time as well, Gilbert. So I'm trying to popularize the TTF abbreviation. I mean, we're so good with abbreviations anyway, right? So let's all just agree to call them TTFs, like UDFs for user data functions. Let's in here just create a new database item. It was super cool to see how Craig showed that new item creator experience. It's not available for me yet, but I'm really looking forward to that. I will have to do it the old-fashioned way here and create a SQL database. This takes a while. I wanted to just call it something so I can find it and delete it again afterwards. Queensland Power BI Fabric User Group demo. Creating this database, I'm just going to load in sample data, so we don't have to ingest all kinds of stuff through data flows or pipelines or notebooks. But of course, you can use an existing SQL database in Fabric that you have, or you could, as mentioned before, be using a warehouse. Now, why is this still spinning? I have no clue. So let's see if I have to reuse the database that I already have, or if it was just the UI being a little weird. Still being created. You know what? We'll reuse the database I already have, and we'll just create a couple of extra tables in here for me to use. So I have here, just imagine that I just spun up this DB and I clicked the use sample data button in the middle of the screen when it's completely empty, the database, to load this sales LT schema with all the AdventureWorks tables in here. Then what I've done was that I meant to open up Copilot, just because I'm lazy and not that great at SQL, but I have the queries saved here. This was just generated by Copilot. I want to create a table to hold comments for this AdventureWorks data. I wanted to have an identity column as the primary key. It's just a comment ID. I want to store my comments on a product ID that's just an integer, and I want to store a comment as well as a variable character. So running this query gets us a comments table. We can create a secondary one here. So now there's an empty table called comments2 right here. And it's empty, of course, for good reason. And now I could start using actually Power BI and use data functions to create a very, very simple comment app that just logs comments on a product ID. But as you might recall from my demo, I also wanted to include this functionality of being able to choose a level of detail, product versus product category. And also, I'd like to be able to assign a score just to have some data to do, I don't know, a kind of an analysis on. So I'll just, modify the table very quickly, add 2 extra columns, a category result integer column, and a level of detail varchar column as well. Oh, of course, they already exist in the old table, but in the new table, we now hopefully, no, I'm of course not selecting the entire thing. There we go. And I now have a blank table here with 5 different columns. And I also have my general schema, my general AdventureWorks database ready to go and ready to be used in Power BI. And I've been talking for a long time now. So I think this is a good first opportunity to see if there are any questions yet in the chat, Gilbert, if you want to let me know.
Yep. Yes, there are. One of the first questions is around saying deleting is dangerous. Is the way to track changes rather than deleting, such as slowly changing dimensions?
Yeah, excellent question. And yes, there is. It's just a matter of you coding that functionality in your UDF, and we can discuss that in much greater detail when we get to actually setting up the user data function later in the session. But it's just a matter of making sure that the SQL code that's being executed by your UDF is treating your underlying table like a slowly changing dimension type 2, for example. Yeah. So instead of deleting, you are adding a new row and updating the previous row to be inactive or something like that. It could also be, there are different dimensional types, of course, that supports that pattern. I fully agree. Deleting is dangerous if your data is remotely sensitive or history needs to be preserved. Good question.
Yep, awesome. Another one is write back to a SharePoint list or Excel possible?
Also a good question. I have that listed as one of the limitations on the final slide of the session today, that currently this only works. UDFs are only able to write back to native Fabric artifacts right now. It might be somebody who figured out a hack, but it's not something I discovered yet. It says on the official documentation that only Fabric data sources are supported. I wouldn't be surprised if there will be support for this going forward. They just added SharePoint lists as a data destination for data flows Gen 2, right? I'm not sure if that's something you've covered on this user group, but it seems like they realized that that's a common request. Right back to Excel, I think, is a different story. I wouldn't count on that coming anytime soon.
Okay, awesome. That's it for the questions for now.
So the database has been spun up. We just sort of, when I'm designing these solutions, what's my flow here? I would usually, depart from having my backend. Then I would probably go ahead and create my semantic model and report and figure out what are my write back needs. Then I would go back to the SQL DB to add those whatever columns and tables I need to support the write back. And then I would create the user data flow. Now, to kind of get a little ahead of time, I created those destination comment tables, etc., beforehand here. But my usual flow would otherwise be that right after initializing the DB, having my backend ready, maybe this flow makes sense because you probably already have a semantic model and a report that you want to use as sort of the basis for this. But nonetheless, the next part here for me is to create my semantic model. There are 3 options, right? We know those: import, direct query, and direct lake. How do each of these models allow us to do translytical task flows? Well, import works, but whatever data we create with our translytical task flow will not show up in our semantic model until the import refresh has completed. It's technically possible to trigger our import model refresh as the final step in our user data function. And if your refresh only takes seconds, then the delay could be pretty low, but it's not optimal. there's no way around it. That the tables that you're using for the translytical task flow itself, they should not be in import mode ideally, unless your users really don't need live feedback. Direct Lake works better than import, but the whole reframing of the data model that needs to take place for it to pick up the new files that come in also see about a minute delay in my experience before data appears in my model. And then because the Power BI report won't know exactly when this reframing has taken place, I might still need to manually click the refresh visuals button for the data to actually show up for the end user. Overall, it's a bit the same story with import. It works, but there's a delay. The user will not experience a true live experience using Direct Lake. Direct Query is where it's at. That's also what Microsoft recommends. It works out of the box, and just want the note at the bottom to be highlighted here that you don't need your entire model to be Direct Query. You'll be doing just fine by having just the tables that you need to be live to be Direct Query. So in my example here, I just created that comments table you saw. I could import the entire AdventureWorks model and then just have the comments table be Direct Query. Of course, it's a different story if what I'm doing with my task flow is writing back to those import tables. I'll need to take one of those import tables and make that into Direct Query. But the point is, you don't need your entire model to be Direct Query if you're fine with having a composite model. Right. So creating the model. And this is where things get a little funky, I think. So Craig just showed us a second ago how more and more features of Power BI Desktop are landing in the service, right? We can now create import models and direct query models from the service using the Power Query experience that we are used to. Well, translytical task flows can only be created and maintained in Power BI Desktop. So that's where we're heading. I'm going to open up Power BI Desktop. And the first thing I just wanted to show you was where to enable those preview features. So going into options and settings, I'm not sure why that didn't open straight away. There we go. Under preview features, you need to scroll down. This list is getting comically long. And you'll want to enable the button slicer visual, the list slicer visual, and the text slicer visual. You'll also want to enable translytical task flow. And if you're using a Fabric SQL DB, the connect to Fabric SQL databases. After enabling, you'll need to restart Power BI, and then you're good to go. Now I need to connect to the backend of my Fabric to the SQL database in Fabric. I'm going to go to OneLake catalog here and select the translytical demo DB. I didn't manage to load any data into that one, so we'll skip that, and we'll click connect. Things are not too slow here. Power BI Desktop is not acting nice with me today. Just give it a second here. It's because it's asking me to log in. Fair enough. If everything goes crazy, we can just load up the already pre-cooked report. But I figured you'd want the whole journey here. I might regret saying that, but let's just give it half a minute to see how it goes. All right, here we are. So I can go ahead and add everything from my AdventureWorks data model here, and I'll also go ahead and add that comment table that we created a second ago. So clicking load here, I want to decide whether to use import or direct query. I'm going to go ahead and just direct query everything here, so you don't have to wait for a huge load. Let's hope that goes fast. Now, the first thing I want to do with this Power BI report is just to create that simple product table on the left, right? That sort of showed the number of units sold by product category and product. And we're not going to prioritize making things look super nice and clean here, right? So it's just a bar chart here. I'm going into product category, and just before you get mad at me, the relationships are preserved from the demo DB, so I didn't need to worry about all the relationships. But of course, the comments table will set that up in a second and connect that to the model. But first, just building the frame here. Let's put in the product category and the product name. Oh, didn't mean to get the ID. I meant to get the product category name, right? And then we just want some kind of measure for, I could create a calculated measure here. I could be lazy and just put in the order quantity, and there we are, right? This is essentially the same visualization you saw me having before. Now, as the designer of my report and Translytical Task Flow, is where in the design process I need to think about what do I want my users to input on this table, right, or on this data model. And if the short answer is I just want them to be able to add a comment, well, what we need to do here is to leverage the new text slicer that we enabled as a preview feature. So the text slicer itself is nothing more than a free text box. And the magic here, or the trick here, is to not add anything to the field well. If we don't add anything to the field well, this doesn't filter anything. We don't want it to filter anything, but instead it allows us to just act as like a raw text input for users to use in these task flows. So text slicer equals a comment in this case. I can give it a brief title, right? Enter comment here, and it looks ugly, but this is what it is. And if I also want to give my users the ability to select a level of detail and select a score for whatever comment that they are inputting here, which could make sense in an annotation scenario, that's where I can leverage these list slicers and button slicers as well. And I have a slide that just very briefly details sort of the do's and don'ts of these very briefly, right? Text slicers are free text input, and list slicers and button slicers that are therefore categorical or dimensional values, right? I think it's very important to mention here that if you are already using lists, buttons, and text slicers in your Power BI report, and you want to pick up the context of those for saving in your columns in your database, you don't need to go ahead and create new ones. You can pick up values from existing text, list, and button slicers in your report and pass those to the flow. Important information number one. Important information number two, okay, we are limited to these three types of slicers. That sounds a little silly. It is silly. There is no way here to make a slicer here with a drop down. So for example, if I want to get input from a user on, selecting a product, I can put in a list slicer and I can put in the product name, but I'll get this huge ugly list, and I can't format this as a drop down. Or I could make it a button slicer and I can get a grid, but does that help me? No, not really. So there are some formatting limitations, pretty harsh formatting limitations of these slicer types. You'll just have to live with that. But what you can do is that you are also allowed to actually use calculated measures as inputs for your Translytical Task Flows. So you could also just use a regular slicer or pick up the context from a visual in your report by creating a calculated measure and use the DAX expression selected value, or even values or concatenate X or something like that. Something that create actually values will probably not work. You'll probably need to use a concatenate over values to get a text string, and you can pass multiple values if you want to do that, or a single value with selected value to your task flow with a calculated measure. So there are hacks, ways around the limitations, but when you read Microsoft documentation, they make it seem like your only options really are these slicers. And it is what we'll be using for the quick demo today. So my data model here does not include a table or information about these score values that I wanted to assign to items in my report. And also, I don't have a table or a column that allows me to choose product category and product. And what I like to do to solve this is actually just to go to enter data. This is by far the fastest way to just add, a TTF table, call that level of detail, and call it score, and say, well, for product category, we want to be able to have a score 1, 2, 3, and for products, we want it to go up to 5, something like that. Load that in. And we can now use those values. They don't need to be connected to anything in my model at all for them to be categorical values that I can use and set with my slicers. So I can now go ahead and I can create a list slicer and populate it with the level of detail. And there's only 2 options here. That's way more manageable, right? And let's just go ahead and quickly say, I want to force a selection, so there should always be 1 selected. Shape, sure, rectangle. Buttons shown, let's only show 2. We can make it a little smaller. These formatting tricks you'll have to get yourself used to, right? Then we also want a button slicer, and we could create a grid, or we could create a single row, but we want to populate it with our score, and we want to make sure it doesn't aggregate. We want to make sure that it's why can I? Oh, it's on the tooltip. That's strange. So here I have my score, and notice that by default, whenever I choose product or product category, there's an inherent relationship in the table, right? That makes it so I can only pick the relevant scores here. And because there's no relationship to the rest of my model, I don't risk filtering anything else. Speaking of which, though, I do need to add a relationship to my comments table that I added earlier, just so that selecting the right product ID will filter my comments table. One should be 1 too many, in fact. We don't care too much about cross-filter direction and everything when we're doing this small amount of data. There will only be 1 row of data per combination of level of detail and product ID, but you will need to, of course, be a little more careful with how you set up your relationships to the tables that you use for write-back in a real production scenario. But I actually have my 3 inputs here now, right? I am able to select a product or product category. I'm able to assign a score, and I'm able to, this should be single select, of course. And I'm able to put in free text comments here. So now my Power BI report in terms of functionality is more or less there. However, I of course need to put in a button here to save the data, to delete the data, and maybe also that table to visualize the data created, right? But I think it's at this point in the design process that it makes sense to go over into the user data function, as we now have sort of I've been through the thought process of designing my report and also designing what inputs do I want my users to give. So now it's time to design that function that will actually take this information and feed it into the backend. Before we do that, just wanted again, Gilbert, to see if there were any new questions in the chat.
Yes, there is. There was one question around how is security and row level security managed? Can I write to a table with object level security configures?
Okay, good
Basically,
question.
Yeah, what happens if I don't have access to edit the table?
Right. Good question. Basically, the UDF is gonna run in the context of the calling user. So if the calling user does not have access to an object, they should not be able to modify this data. In addition, you'll need to grant people access to run the UDF itself. I'll show you that in a second.
Okay.
As part of setting up the flow.
Yeah, awesome. And there was another question around data validation.
Oh yeah, great question.
Yeah.
So again, just like the story was with the with the previous question before of can you do this as a slowly changing dimension, regarding data validation, you have to code the data validation yourself, but it's possible to do. So you can implement a check in your user data function, and we'll get to it in a second, right? You'll see how to structure it, but you could, as part of your code, have a check that says, well, let's say that you were letting users input a number with the free text slicer. And you want that number to be between the values 10 and 50, but the user inputted the value 2. You can have a check in the UDF that checks the value of the incoming parameter and throws an error back to the user if the condition is not correct. It could also be a simple check for checking the data type. Is it in fact a string or an integer coming in, or those kind of things. I actually have not my own example, but a link to some examples where there is proper data validation that you can use as inspiration. I'll share that link with you on this exact slide. So,
okay, awesome.
Before, were there more questions?
No, that was it.
Okay, cool. So the user data function, the thing that binds everything together here and takes your input from the front end, the Power BI report we just created, and translate it into your backend. How does that work? Basically, 4 steps to setting this up. We need to create and define our function, including parameters, conditional logic, write-back functionality, feedback to user, data validation would be a point here under conditional logic likely. We need to publish the function. We need to grant permissions to use the function. And then we need to map the function to a button in Power BI. I am not a Python expert. I come from a low-code background, and I have no experience making Python before Fabric, and a little bit of Fabric in our notebook stuff in Fabric, right? So I've taken a lot of inspiration from Sujata, who I believe is the program manager for Translytical Task Flows. She has a great GitHub with some examples of user data function, and this is also where you can get a lot of inspiration for use cases, right? There's the whole write back thing here. There is look up and get context information. There is send out dynamic emails. There is approval flows, AI suggestions, all that stuff. But she also has some really good examples of how to actually structure your UDFs, including examples of, well, here's the whole applying discount write-back functionality, where if the value inputted is less than 0, throw an error to the user saying, hey, stop, the discount cannot be negative. Oh, misclick. So data validation, just to answer the question better from before, is definitely possible. And I'll encourage you strongly to look up Sujata's GitHub here to get inspiration for how to structure your Python code. The Python code that I'm going to show you today is laughably simple and inspired entirely by the default code examples that are part of the GUI where you can create UDFs. So I'm now jumping back into the service. The user data function has to be created in here. And this is where the cooking show magic comes into play a little, right? I think I'll show you a little how to build and structure these. Then we'll review the code that I have already created instead of creating it from scratch, also just in the interest of time. So when you create a new user data function, this is what you get, except this whole thing is just blank. And what you first need to do when you create a new user data function for writeback is that you need to go into manage connections, and you need to make sure that your destination database is added as a data connection. And it's as simple as clicking add data connection and using the one-leg catalog to navigate to your SQL DB and press connect. It'll automatically create this. You don't need to define it. And it gives what's important here is actually this alias that it gives your data source. Because if you go ahead and let's just pretend this was blank and go into edit mode here and click insert sample, there are some pretty good samples for writing one row of data into a table in a SQL database. And it just gives you a sample code here that even tells you, well, you need to go to manage connections and add a connection, and then you need to copy the alias name and replace it inside the UDF connection decorator. So right here is the UDF connection decorator, and I need to go ahead and replace this little string with whatever my alias was inside of my managed connections. So that's one setup step that you'll need to do. Then another setup step that you need to do that's not part part of this sample, and which baffles me a little, has to do with library management, in the sense that if you don't do anything else than insert your sample, it'll try to use this UDF connection function, but it will not know where to fetch it unless you manually put in these 2 lines of code. And the only reason I figured that out was because Sujata does this in the beginning of all of her examples. So full credits there, right? She always starts by importing whatever libraries she needs. Of course, that's obvious to any Python developer, but me coming from Power Apps, I needed to just realize this. So this little piece of code here is not part of the sample code you can get in the interface. You need to put that yourself, and then you can start using the samples that are supplied in here. The sample code that's in here even has a little bit of sort of validation logic in that it's going to create a table for you if it doesn't already exist. I have my table already. I can go ahead and delete that. But otherwise, the general schema here for how to write or append one row of data is pretty straightforward. I just need to customize which parameters do I want to pass to my function. I need to make sure that if I make changes here, I need to make the changes everywhere where these parameters are being referenced. But then I'm able to construct a SQL query that does this inserting. I, in my case, was not satisfied with inserting. I wanted to also have update functionality. So I made mine a little bit more complex, but it should be easy enough that you can follow when I just go through what I've done here. So first 4 lines of code, I don't really know what they're doing, but they're importing a library, defining the library with a short handle and creating a connection, and then defining a function here. So I'm defining and then providing the name of the function as I want it to be known as when I'm calling it from Power BI. And then as parameters, it needs to be fed the connection that I'm creating, and then also the 4 parameters that I need to be able to do my write back. In my case, I need, if you recall, in my database, I had 5 columns: comment ID, product ID, comment, level of detail, and category result. I don't need the comment ID because that's just an auto-incrementing identity column. In your write-back scenarios, you might need to include a primary key manually created by Power BI or something like that, or created by the UDF, but I don't need it here. I do need, however, to pick up context from Power BI regarding what's the product ID that the user has selected, what's the comment that they've inputted in the free text slicer, what's the level of detail they selected in the list slicer, and what's the category result that they put in the button slicer. And I need to make sure that the data types, they match both what's coming in and what's coming out. I'm going to go ahead and store those parameters in a small object here, just to make certain calls a little easier to make. But I show you multiple ways of using these parameters in the code below. Then here, another little bit of generic functionality that you need to do. You need to establish a connection and create a cursor object here. Then what I do to make this a conditional and say, I want to do a lookup basically to my comment table and say, is there already a comment on the selected product ID and level of detail combination? If there is, I want to run an update statement. And if not, I want to run an insert statement. So first, I define a lookup query and say, select star from schema name dot table name where product ID equals question mark and input level of detail equals question mark. These question marks allows me to call this lookup query and pass in parameters to these values, right? So I'm using now cursor.execute to execute my lookup query. And as parameters in this order, and the order is all important here, the first parameter I'm passing is the product ID, and the second parameter I'm passing is my level of detail. And then I'm saying fetch and store 1 record from this lookup, the first record. Then I'm saying, okay, if the lookup returns true, if it's not blank, then I want to run an update query. And I basically do that the exact same way as I do it here, except I use update, and I have 4 different variables to be passed here, meaning that when I run cursor.execute update query, I pass in 4 different parameters in the order that you see here. then you need to use a little bit of, again, you just need to learn which functions to use to actually commit and close these connections. And then I can return a message to the user. And that's the one that was seen in the little pop-up box that I showed you during the demo. Comment has been updated. Else, if the lookup is empty, well, then I want to insert into my query a statement. And here I decided to just design it slightly different to show you an alternative way of constructing this. I'm again using insert, but instead of defining question marks like so, I'm saying values and then defining an object here that references back to the order of the columns I'm supplying here. And then I'm just saying cursor.execute insert query and populate it with the data object that I created all the way up here. That's another way that you can reuse code inside of your UDF if you want. Otherwise, same thing, connection commit, close, and close the connection. Now the UDF is actually done, and all we need to do is to go into Power BI. Well, I forgot a step. You need to publish whatever you've built. Just delete all the extra stuff I built there. You publish it, and once it's published, it will be available for use inside of Power BI if you've made sure to share the UDF with the people trying to find it in Power BI. So you need to find the share button if it's not yourself creating the Power BI report, but you can decide whether or not they should be able to use the UDF in here. Once that's done, once it's shared with the Power BI developer, they can go ahead and add a new button and say blank button, for example. Let's go here. Let's just give it a little bit of text here. Say save. And on this button, if I toggle action here, there's a new type of action called data function. This only appears if you've ticked the Translytical Task Flow option in preview features. But if you select this, you can point to a workspace, you can point to a function set, and to a specific function in the function set, because maybe you noticed before I actually have multiple functions in one function set here. So I also have my delete function in the same place. But here, I just point to that, and Power BI Desktop is now able to automatically recognize the 4 parameters that I need to set here. And I can very easily map these. The comment, I need to map that to, well, it'll get the title of your slicers and list them here. So you need to title your visualizations carefully. The level of detail should be the LOD, and the category result should be the score. And then there's the product ID. How am I going to pick up whatever product ID that user has selected? Well, I'm going to go conditional formatting here. And you could select a calculated measure here, but I am just going to go ahead and do the very lazy way and say, give me just the max of the product ID, which, when a single product is selected, will give me the right result. So right now, this button is mapped to my UDF, but it will also tell you if there's something missing. So for example, if I forgot to fill in a comment, it will disable the button. So right now I can click it, but if I clear this, it will automatically disable the box here. Similarly, this button will also be able to recognize how long the underlying function is running, and you can use this to your advantage to style your buttons in a user-friendly way to say, well, while it's loading, I want a small icon to appear, and I want to format in a specific way. When it's disabled, I want to gray it out and make sure that the user knows that it's disabled. So you can do some things with UX here, right? Just to show you what that looks like. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on formatting just now. I just want to show you that everything here works. So I'm just going to put in a comment here. Comments 2. And I'm just now realizing that we forgot to map this to comments 2. So let's see if we can quickly make that edits and say comments 2, comments 2, comments 2. That should be all. And I needed to refresh first. Okay, it persisted. Let's click publish. This can take a minute or two, so I'm curious to see whether this publishing in progress. I won't be able to call this until it's done. So while that's publishing, I just want to, in the interest of time, go ahead and just talk a little bit comparison and limitations, and then I'll show you afterwards that what we built before is working. Translytical task flows. I like that the solution architecture gets simpler. Yeah, likely cheaper, unless whatever you're doing with your UDF is some kind of crazy data manipulation that requires a lot of compute. The Power BI integration is more seamless than with Power Apps. If any of you are familiar with embedding Power Apps in Power BI, you often get weird black borders around the app that you integrate. There are some limitations with how many rows of data can the Power App see from your semantic model. There's a lot of clunky things there. And I also like how flexible Python is, right, as compared to a low-code solution like Power Apps. However, everything's in preview. The UX options I showed you today is basically what there is. As mentioned, you cannot create a drop-down slicer with one of the slicers that work for this. You have to sort of hack your way around and create all sorts of calculated measures to accommodate for the lack of UX functionality. If I want to do like a multi-page layout, technically possible with bookmarks, but I don't know how you guys feel about bookmarks. They quickly become a little crazy to work with, right? In general, this translates into what are the pros of Power Apps? Well, they are more flexible in terms of UI and UX. I also think performance is actually better on Power Apps. You saw my initial sort of, I'm writing my first comment on this report. It took 20 seconds to run. That's not a great user experience, especially if what you're doing is maybe only a single comment. I have not done a lot of testing on bulk write back to compare performance between those two. There could be something there. But the cons of Power Apps are very clear too, that they're expensive to run if you have many users needing to input comments, for example, and your solution architecture becomes more complex. You have to consider security on that side of your solution too. Let's see if the solution has published. Yeah, it says so. So let's see if I just quickly do all columns here. Summarize. All right, something like that. If I go ahead now and select a product and say first comment, I can now click the save button, and you'll realize that it's a little clunky also working with this in Power BI Desktop. Even with direct query, it needs to refresh the schema every time you click this function. So troubleshooting your function is a lot of fun because this has to load every time. I hope the whole TTF functionality comes into the service at some point. But now here's my comment. And if I go ahead and make a change to this comment, edit it, it'll again refresh my schema, but the data will be overwritten. And if I go ahead and make a comment on the product category with a different score, you'll see that as well. And we've basically recreated the functionality. You see it says edited. We've recreated the functionality that you saw in my initial report, save for the delete button. But the delete button is the exact same thing. I do a lookup, the same lookup query as before, and then I just do I didn't even need the top one here, but I do a delete from and pass my parameters the same way as the other one. So that's how to do it in a nutshell without all the best practices, right? Because there was an excellent question earlier about the data validation aspect. I think an untold story here is also making sure that you communicate correctly with the user when things have been executed, right? Making sure that you do something nice there. Again, I can only encourage you to check out Sujata's examples here. She has some pretty good ideas about, well, even sending out Teams messages it as like a feedback to users when something has been changed through a translytical task flow. So there are some pretty neat examples in there. Just wondering if there was anything else I wanted to say before we take any final questions as well. I have a single last slide here that's just general other limitations of translytical task flows. They only work with native storage items in Fabric, only works with the new preview slicers or with the calculated measures hack. it doesn't support PBIR and PBIP format reports and models, and this doesn't work in embedded scenarios as of yet. Like as a fifth item here, you can only set it up in Power BI Desktop. But with those limitations and knowing that the UX and UI is a little limited, I think it presents itself as an excellent alternative, especially for some of those simpler write-back scenarios. So questions from the chat, Gilbert, or if you haven't written it yet, I guess there's still time to add it there, if there's anything there.
Yeah, there haven't been any other questions. Everyone's just saying, yep, it looks good. Obviously, there's a lot of steps to it, but it works well once it's configured.
Right. It's definitely not the easiest sort of setup. I think that Power Apps are easier to learn than creating UDFs, but with the help of a GPT model, it's not that hard to get started with this. And I honestly, as I mentioned, having built hundreds of Power Apps extensions for Power BI, it's so often a showstopper that you need Power Apps premium licenses to write back to, for example, Fabric.
Yeah.
And this, of course, alleviates that specific pain point, even if it introduces some other challenges to be solved.
Yeah. One of the questions is can it trigger any semantic link Python libraries, or how, in terms of using that Python UDF, can you extend it to do a whole lot of other things, I guess?
Good question. And I actually haven't tried, but I suppose it can. I'm pretty sure you can import the Senpai, the semantic link labs library into your UDF, and query your semantic models through those libraries. Yeah.
Because essentially it's just running Python code. So in theory,
exactly.
You could do any other thing, obviously, within what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and when I say that it works only with Fabric native storage items, that's of course only half the truth in that case, right? That's a matter of the if you can code your way out of it through native Python with API calls, you can probably write to other storage artifacts too. It's just that the whole connection management and the part that makes this a little easier, let's say you were a developer coming from a Power Apps developer background and you needed to make this integration work in Fabric, you'd have a hard time using anything but the Fabric storage items. I would expect that you can if you're savvy enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess it depends, on what your capabilities are and what you're trying to achieve.
Very much so. Yeah. What are your skill set?
Yep. Otherwise, that's about it. Ray, one of our regulars, saying he's been waiting for this for half a decade.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most asked for features. Yeah, and I think it also, I think it shows a kind of fun, I don't know, power struggle within Microsoft even, right? Like, is it in Microsoft's best interest as a whole to sell fewer Power Platform licenses? Maybe not. Is it in Arun's interest to move some Power Platform spend into Fabric? Yeah, pretty much. I don't know how those interests are aligned, but I think I think that's why it's taken so long.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a little bit of where does this kind of functionality belong, right? Is Power BI supposed to be like a software application, or is it a reporting tool?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's good to have the flexibility to allow,
I think so too.
For that to be able to now be done, like you're saying. Yes, there's once you got, it's almost a lot of the stuff is like the pattern. Once you got the pattern, you just got to tweak a few things and rinse.
I think we'll see great, like Sujata's examples are great. I think we'll see tons of templates coming out for this in the next year or two. That you can just take and modify the table and column names and set it up, and you're good to go.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, definitely. We don't have to do all of the hard work. They'll do a lot of the hard work. We can just edit it.
Exactly, and that's especially neat for considering all those best practices, right, for data validation and for communicating to the user what's happening, and especially those things. You forget to do that if you start from scratch every time.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Otherwise, there are no other questions. They're just asking to share the link with the GitHub UDF.
I'll make sure. I don't know what's the easiest way to distribute. I also thought of sending the slides to you, Gilbert. Do you share that via Meetup, or should I just paste the link for the for Sujata's GitHub in the chat here?
I'm happy if you want to send through the slides, and I can share it on via the Meet Hub, and then at least it's got all those nice tools and tips that you have in there also. I mean, you can put it in the chat also. But
I'll put the link directly in the chat just for people who are super eager. And otherwise, I'll make sure that the PowerPoint is shared with you, Gilbert, just so you can distribute it.
Yeah, well, thanks for your time, and thanks for going through that.
Of course,
was really good to see it in action and how it all pieces together.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, Gilbert. It was a pleasure to present to you guys, and kudos for all the good questions. Usually when I do sessions, there's like one or two. So it was so nice that every time I paused, there was a couple of reflections there. So thank you for being active contributors. I think that's awesome to have a community like that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and to everyone else on the call, we'll let you know in due course what our next meetup will be. So thanks for joining, and I hope to see you soon. And Jan, enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to
thank you so much, and sleep tight when you get there.
Awesome.
See you around, guys.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Bye.